He's on the river, so he was saying that his are catching recently he's been 25 to 35 grand a month in gross rents. And he's netting like 8 to 10. I don't know if he was just pitching. I feel like he was kind of pitching us that we should invest there. So I'm like, I don't know if this is, it seems a little too good to be true, but he was doing well. He bought a couple, and I think he built 2 little like detached dwellings on the property, and they're all on the river, so he can rent them individually or collectively. Sound like he was doing well. He lives in San Diego and then bounces back and forth. But is that done pretty well for you?
Yeah. I was going to say like ADU style.
Yeah, so I think he was saying he bought like 1 or 2 acres on the river, and then essentially like one was an old cabin that was beat up that he renovated and turned into like an accessory dwelling or cottage. And then I think the other property has 3 buildings on it. So he rents them to like a family or individually, basically.
Yeah, one of my neighbors, they just did that. They had 1 unit and built a 2nd unit on that same property, and they're trying to sell. So I would consider buying it if I could, but I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah. Are you on the water or like in there?
No, I'm 2 miles outside of the park.
Okay, cool.
And so it's like perfect for anybody who wants to go to the park.
Sweet.
Yeah. It's Fish Cannon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Autumn knows a thing or two about that area.
I've got family all around that area.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Norm, where are yours at?
I'm here in Arlington. I try to keep the things when we move to keep them as a rental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
So you're,
Tenants are fine, no issions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of headache dealing with tenants, but I do it myself, so.
Self-managed?
Yeah.
you have one in Fairlington too, right?
I'm getting ready to buy one in Fairlington, actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Tell us about the numbers here in a minute.
Yeah.
Went through the numbers. Let's look at them. Tashika, where's yours at?
In Martinsville, Virginia.
Yeah.
Martin?
Like an hour from Roanoke.
Yeah.
Nice. How does that do?
It's pretty good. I have family renting it out from me.
That's nice.
So
People that got your back and maybe
Yeah.
give them a little bit of a discount, but you know it's, yeah, pay on time.
Pros and cons.
Big pros and cons.
Pros and cons. We'll talk about that. I got family living in some of mine too. Riley, I know you've got a property you're looking to buy a second, right?
Yeah, I would love to, man.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, probably like relatively a shoe. So I'm definitely wanting to be talking to you guys.
Yeah, let's
Nice.
do it. All right, cool. So we're going to share our wins. We'll run through the slides casually, but also talk about our experiences over the last 10 years buying rentals. I bought my first property in 2006 and then bought one every year for the next 3 years. Kept those for a while. So collectively, we've had 25 properties total. We just unloaded a handful that became headaches for us over the last couple of years post-eviction moratorium, and we'll share that experience and then kind of what we're focusing on now. And then we'll share those wins and losses, and let's talk about where you guys have won and where you want to learn.
Yep. And honestly, we don't necessarily need to go through all these slides. We certainly can, right? Like either it's more of a conversation or it's a, what is a buy and hold, right? Like we can kind of run through these and then just kind of make it a dialogue if that works for you all. So what's a buy and hold, right? Whether you uncover opportunities through prospecting, network, or marketing, getting the phone to ring is a critical skill to becoming a successful real estate investor. So it's kind of like where are your leads coming from?
You got it back there too.
Yeah, like Riley's blocking me, man.
You don't have
It's all right.
You don't have 2020 anymore?
No, I do not. 38 is not kind to me. But I would say too, like maybe even just to jump into it a little more and not read through the slides, but like in today's environment, right? Like when we're looking at rental properties, how have we seen the market change from pre-COVID to now from just a overall, is this worth a rental?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing pre-COVID we look at is the 1% rule. If you guys follow real estate investing, all the 1% rule is pretty common. You buy a place for $200,000. If it rents for $2,000 a month, then that's kind of like a green light. That should be a good rental. And then you investigate that market or the numbers a little bit more. I would say post-COVID, with the run-up, it's probably at the 0.05% rule. Whereas if you're buying a place for $400,000, will I rent for $2,000, at least locally? And so those numbers have changed a lot. And you used to buy and be able to buy pretty easily for cash flow in those markets. As the prices have gone up and now the rates have come up with it, cash flow is a challenge, especially if you're buying traditional Fannie Freddie loans. And so, it's changed quite a bit as the pricing post-COVID has accelerated. Even in 2019, 2020, 2021, we were buying rentals and we were really pushing our client base to buy rentals, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, townhouses, because while the costs to acquire were rising, the money was so cheap. Looking back on it, we wish we would have bought 15 more between 2019 and 2021 even. because we locked in some duplexes and triplexes in Arlington and
3%.
Falls Church for 2.9 to
3.5.
3.25 on 30-year fixed rates on a 2 and 3 unit. So even though it seemed expensive at the time to buy a Pocomoke for $1 million, or we were just talking about Pershing, a duplex in Clarendon for 1.2, the money was so cheap. Now that as we've increased rents 3 and 5, 6% the last couple of years, the cash flow is actually pretty solid. And we have no intention of trading those assets, which is why the market is also down across the country, because people are holding on to those assets. In a current market, it's almost impossible locally to find cash flow because prices are high, construction is high, and mortgages are high right now. So it's kind of forcing investors to get creative and think outside the box, I'd say.
Yeah.
So something we've been looking at from a buy and hold strategy is where do we add value to the house? And again, one of the reasons we went to Seattle is to see how these guys scaled from 10 properties to 1,000 properties over a 10-year stretch. And so we'll share some of our takeaways from that as well. But one of the things they look at buy and hold differently than we have, which is a buy and hold they might only own for 1 to 2 years. Basically get away from the short-term capital gains of a flip, buy a beat up, trashed out house, renovate it, hold it for 1 to 2 years, and then trade it up from a 1 unit to a 4 unit. So basically that forced appreciation, which we talk about a lot. And so we've done that over the years, but what they've done is they've bought basically a flip, they hold it for 2 to 3 years, they cash that out, and they keep trading asset classes for 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 10, and trade it up and treat it like a flip at the long-term hold for a tax play.
And I think, to that point, a lot of these slides might not be necessarily relevant to the current market that we're in, but what we have found, how they're kind of underwriting their deals and approaching them is all right, look, if I can buy this at 7.5%, and he was saying, I'm losing $1,500 a month on this. Now, I'm doing a value add, I'm picking up $200,000 of equity, right, which is on paper. You're not necessarily putting that in your bank, but he's like, I'm willing to do that. And I'm betting that rates are going to drop and I'm going to refi. So then what he's doing is saying, hey, look, I'm going to buy it at this, and then I'm going to have a couple different pro formas at 6.5,
5.5,
6, 5.5, 5 at those different rates. And then the cash flow obviously changes, but your position in that asset doesn't. And I think that was kind of eye-opening to me, where it's kind of taking some short-term pain for long-term gain. Not necessarily something we've ever done, but it was more all right, I see the thought process, and kind of like what we were talking with Tashika and Autumn and the team today is, as rates are kind of bouncing around right now between 7.5 and 7.25, much like they did last fall, except last fall they raised from 5 to 7.5 immediately, right? So it was first time in a calendar year in U.S. history that rates have more than doubled. Everybody came to a screeching halt. But anybody that bought last fall was in a very, very good spot, right? Those were some of our best flip projects that we've ever had, because then we delivered them in the spring market once things settled down, and people were like, all right, well, hey, this is the new normal. I still need to buy something. I'm not going to rent. And supply and demand, right? You're talking about that's really what determines pricing. More so than rates. So it was kind of very interesting, and I feel like we're kind of getting back to that dynamic right now where there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and it's you can really kind of pick your spots. But again, to your point, with the rates being where they are, you're not cash flowing unless you're putting down 40, 50%, and who wants to put down 50% on a rental property, right? That's not the name of the game that we want to be playing.
Yeah, and I think for a couple of years people were burring, and so again, out in Seattle, there's people teaching classes on burring. You guys know what burr is? Anybody not know what BRRRR stands for?
Has anyone done a BRRRR? Yeah.
Buy, renovate, rent, refinance is what it stands for. That normally works better traditionally in a cheaper market. So that wins a kind of a anomaly where you do that in LA and Seattle, an expensive market. But basically you buy for $100, you renovate it for $40, you get it rented for $1,800, you get it appraised based on your current rents. You try to pull out as much of your cash as you can, and then do it again and again. It's a way to accelerate your rental portfolio. It is very hands-on. It's not passive, it's very hands-on because you have to oversee the construction. People were doing that for the last several years, but what happened is a lot of those BRRRR investors got caught because they're like, all right, I'm underwriting these deals at 4 to 5% rates, and while they own the house, the rates hit 8% on an investment. So they're stuck with their equity stuck in it, and they didn't necessarily buy it with that strategy in mind. So what they were saying is instead of going BRRRR, they're doing straight value add. So you blend a flip with the rental, right? So we have one that we bought in Delray for $680.
Yep.
The original play was to put 120 into it and sell it for $925, $950. With that, we're netting 50 to 70K profit, right? When you do that, you're also paying short-term capital gains. You're paying ordinary income on that. So that 60K taxed at 40% turns into 36,000, right? And so we have looked at this over the years. We actually haven't executed because we test the market. We're like, we'll take a quick 50 and we'll move on. What they're pivoting to in the short term is you take that. So now you're at 680. Your basis is 800. You get it to appraise at 925 or 950. You've now created an extra 150K of equity by improving that property strategically. By holding it for 2 years, now you've got 125, let's say, versus 60K profit because you're not paying closing costs twice. You're not paying commissions. You're not paying taxes. You're not staging it, right? So now you're creating 125K instead of 60 of equity or net worth. You're not paying taxes on that. So what they're doing is saying, okay, I'm going to hold that 125. I'm going to let that appreciate for 5%. So now it's 950, then it's $1 million, then it's $1,050,000. 2 years out, when that property is now worth 950, now your equity position is 225. They're going to sell it at that point, but 1031 it. So they're not actually paying taxes. So they're blending the flip strategy with the buy and hold strategy. Now you might only owe 600 on that, and you're cashing out at $1 million. You're taking the 400,000. You're applying that to a $1.6 million purchase at 25% down, and now you're picking up here. That might be 2, 3, 4 units. And so that's something that we're looking at right now actively and coaching our clients through as well. Because if you're just looking at cash flow, you pretty much have to go an hour and a half outside of the DC metro area to really find cash flow right now. And we'll talk about what's worked well for us there and what hasn't with that strategy.
So you're talking about picking up and then renovating it and putting a tenant in there?
Right.
With the renovated property?
Yep. So what we're doing on the Delray house, we are now going to hold that, furnish it, and do an Airbnb VRBO. And we're going to track those numbers really close for the Delray. It's walkable to the metro. It's walkable to Delray. We're going to run those numbers for 12 months, compare it versus traditional tenant. We know we can rent it, year long, see how that works, and then either keep that strategy and scoop another one or two, or pivot to a long term for the next year with a goal of trading it up in 2 years.
And like to that point though, I also think it comes down to like what's the highest and best use of the property, like knowing what you can actually do within the confines of the boundary lines. And this one, we've been talking with the planner at Alexandria City, and it sounds like we could potentially build a 380 square foot ADU, right? So 20 by 20-ish.
Possibly
right?
760
On
if we
this-
do the second floor.
Yeah. So then like this is a duplex, it's not one of the townhomes, so you have it's a 0.10 acre lot, right? But there's, you're talking it's 1,100 square feet taxable with a basement, so
1,800,
15, 1,600 total. But then there's a huge backyard where we could carve out a separate ADU, build that. We probably would build that for 2-ish, 2 to 250,
Yeah,
and something like that, and then be able to rent both of them out and have 2 rentals on the same property. So that's kind of like the play of what we're looking at is like what is the highest and best use, and how do we play within the sandbox, but figure out like how can we strategically cut this up.
Right.
Would the ADU be like short-term rental or long-term?
Either way. So at that point, so if we build that, let's just say, so there's a chance where it gets complicated. Like we had sent us an email today based on the elevation, how many linear feet above grade, right? A lot of variables.
They make you jump through some hoops, I'll tell you that.
380 square feet at a minimum. If you can add a second floor to that, 760 square feet. So let's just say we're building that for 200 grand. That just added at least $400,000 value to that property for either a family that one could rent that as an Airbnb, could be an in-law suite, could be an au pair suite. For us, we would probably hold it a little longer and probably convert the little one to an Airbnb and probably pivot the other one to a long-term.
The other one long-term,
Yeah. And so then you're playing a cap rate game too, right? So now if you go to position that to sell it, you can increase your returns, sell that at a 6% cap as a stabilized asset with 2 years of financials. Now we created the value from 925. Now with an ADU, maybe it's worth 135, but if you run that well, you might be able to sell it for 1.5, 1.6. Or now you get that appraised at 1.6, you take out some equity and you buy another property with it. It's kind of a long-term BRRRR instead of a short-term BRRRR.
Right.
So that's something that we're looking at. And if they approve us for this one, what we're going to do is go door knock and talk to all the neighbors and see if we can get another property in the same little radius before we start building the ADU to try to beat, kind of beat that to market.
Well, the truth of the matter is, like, it's literally a duplex surrounded by single families, like 5 blocks in every direction. So it's kind of a unicorn. And the side that we bought, and it's just fallen apart. So we're already in contact with that owner and saying, hey, look, we want to buy this too. We just bought your neighbors. How can we make a deal? And it sounds like the family's currently kind of going through the probate process, but it seems like it could be a, kind of a win-win. And then once you own it, it's like, okay, how can we maximize this? But I think too, like the second point here is like what's your long-term strategy, right? Like, is it cash flow, income, appreciation, whatever? And I would say we have tax strategies. I mean, we've done a lot of cost segregations over the last couple years, right? Where what we bought, for instance, the one on Pocomoke that you mentioned, we bought for $1 million in 2019 before the run-up. We did a cost segregation analysis on it. It cost us $5,000 to do it, but we got $234,000 of tax deduction. So he got 117, I got 117 off the top that you're not paying taxes on, and it's like that makes a big difference in terms of what you're paying Uncle Sam. So, kind of depending on what your plan is, but around here, what we've seen, we have 2 types of clients outside of tax planning of kind of how they approach rentals. One is cash flow, and the other one is wanting appreciation, right? Some people want a blue chip, right, in Clarendon, North Arlington, Falls Church City, Delray, those parts. And then kind of to what we were talking about, we just sold off our best performing cash flow ones. They were all down in the 757 down in Hampton Roads, right? But those cap rates were much stronger than what we get up here, but we felt like they had kind of apexed at the appreciation game, and so we wanted to move that money up here. But we have folks that are willing to do both. Some people are willing to break even because they're like, I'm okay even coming out $500 a month, but I know that this asset that I got has a nice equity position, and I am betting on the appreciation of this. So I'm good with riding that wave for the next 10 years and knowing that they're going to keep laddering up their rates, their rental rates, as opposed to some people just want, hey, look, man, like,
I want to squeeze out $300 to $500 of cash flow net on a monthly basis, and so that's their strategy, right?
Yep.
So the conversation that we have with a lot of our clients, at least living in this area, is if we could get you 2 cash flowing properties at $450 to $500 a month, netting you $800 to $1,000 a month, how does that change your lifestyle? Most people in this area, like, it sounds good on paper, but it covers my car payment, right?
It's a nice bar tab.
Or it's my utility bill for the month, right? I mean, because where we live, luckily the incomes are strong and the cost of living is high. Now, if we had that same conversation in Hampton Roads where we owned a lot of these properties, they were cash flowing $600 to $800 a month. That's a different conversation because the median income is a third of what it is here. And so where that conversation normally goes from there is like, what's your college savings plan? What's your retirement plan? What's your tax strategy? And what it normally ends up happening is once we actually kind of map out their investment strategy with them, 80% of clientele in this area are like, you know what, I need a tax benefit, I need a college savings plan, and I need retirement. We're a dual income family making $250K a year, so that extra $500 a month is not going to move the needle for me, but I didn't think about all these other things, and so then we kind of deploy that strategy for them. Because if you think about it, if $800,000 home is appreciating 5% a year, it's $40,000 a year. That's actually north of $3,000 a month in your net worth comparatively to a $400 cash flow. But most people, when you hear like the podcast and everything's just cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. And so our strategy at one point was to buy 100 doors in Hampton Roads and basically replace our active income with passive income and retire at 40. Once we started doing that, we bought 4 a year for the first 2 years, and then we were starting to scale. And then we started to realize, man, we're spending a lot of time in Hampton Roads. I grew up there. My dad's a contractor, but I still need to go walk the property before I'm writing, right? And so we were doing stuff sight unseen, which bit us. And so we were like, okay, if you drive back and forth, if you really want to deploy that strategy, it's a full-time focus. And so we kind of stopped at 9 doors and then let those appreciate for a while. Rob Chavez, who started Grid, is a friend of ours. Very similar experience in Cheverly, Maryland. I'll let him tell the details of the story, but he went all in Cheverly, Maryland, and was like, dude, these cap rates are ridiculous. The cash flow is really strong. I think he bought 40 doors over like a 5-year period. And what they realized 5 years later was that they were cash flowing, but a little better than break even because the maintenance and the vacancy was so high. And so that's what we realized in Hampton Roads is on paper, the cap rates were 12 to 14%. What we didn't realize is that even in areas where we had great military concentration tenants, they were moving every like 12 to 15 months. And what we did is we bought smaller doors that had smaller townhouses that had 2 and 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath. And so as people had families, they moved. If people got transferred, they moved. And those were our good quality tenants. In the areas where cap rates were like 15 to 18% on paper, we were turning tenants like every 9 to 12 months and evicting like every 3, 1 out of every 3.
And to that point, no one saw, what's up, man?
What's going on,
Come
dude?
on in.
Come in.
Little DP boy. And nobody saw COVID coming, right? And then that really kind of changed the game in some of these markets where
Didn't kind of change the game.
it drastically changed the game. But like the whole eviction moratorium, right? It kind of became like a trickle down economics type of thing, and a lot of our people down there became squatters, didn't pay. Everybody in Northern Virginia paid, and everybody, they stayed and they took care of the property. But down there, we had one house in Hampton that basically we gave away at the end of the day.
6 Theodore Street, Hampton, Virginia.
Yeah.
Nice little charming bungalow, 2 beds, 1 bath, 800 square
They were
feet.
having just block parties. I'm talking, they said like little baby
Well-
pools in the yard, people shooting up the house.
No, I mean, block parties, that was after, so they abandoned the house. So they didn't pay rent for 9 months. So they're going through the eviction process, which is impossible during COVID. We weren't down there to check on it weekly, right? So we were trusting our property manager was keeping tabs on it. We had an eviction attorney and a property manager. They moved out, didn't tell us, turned off all the utilities, but what happened is all the neighbors realized it was a vacant house. And so a neighbor actually hit me up one day. I was like, hey, I looked up online. I think you're the owner of this house. I want to let you know what's going on. I'm like, what's up? Yeah, he's like, I was like, they're trying to go through eviction. He's like, dude, this house has been vacant for like 2 months. Your grass is 4 feet tall. They are literally, people have moved inside and out, and are literally throwing block parties
Just
daily,
ragers.
ragers at your property. And by the way, your windows are all smashed out. You have furniture all through your property.
And there was nothing we could do because the tenant kept the water in their name.
Yeah.
And
So we couldn't
yeah.
change the locks legally because so hadn't paid rent going on a year, abandoned the property, vandalized the property, but we couldn't take possession until the water got cut off or we got an eviction. 4 months later, we got granted an eviction. They did so the house was worth, that started, the house was worth $120. They probably did $50,000 worth of damage. So now the house is worth $70K. By
Which
the
is what
time
we sold it to our property manager for.
No, this was to a friend. Take it. This is Doug.
Oh, shit.
But his business down there is he owns buy and holds. He flips houses in Hampton. He buys and holds. So he's boots on the ground. The day after we closed on it, because we were like, look, we're going to break even on a renovation at this point. Let's just unload this asset, cash out, move on, take our losses, right? Day after we closed on it, he sends me videos and pictures. The house got shot up. 8 bullet holes through the entire house. And I was like, man, good luck with that one.
Welcome to Hampton.
Welcome to Hampton, man.
Yeah.
And then we had another one in Portsmouth. This was actually
Armistead.
our best value add by at the time. We bought it as a firehouse, like completely burned. We bought it for $30,000. We put $45,000 into it and got it appraised at $150. So we basically value add rental. Complete renovation 10 years ago. 2 bed, 1 bath, 800 square foot near the shipyard. For a long stretch, we had pretty good tenants of military and shipyard employees. It was renting for like $1,000 a month. So it was like the 1.5% rule. COVID hit. We had a family there of 4, I believe. We had put up a fence for them because they had a dog. Long story short, they didn't pay rent for 18 months. During that 18-month period, they had a water leak. Crawl space was flooding. Didn't tell us, didn't tell the property manager. They got a $1,000 water bill 1 month. Tried taking us to court for being negligent landlords. Hadn't paid rent. Didn't pay the water bill. We ended up in court for 9 months to evict this family. They finally got evicted, and on their way out, they absolutely trashed the house. Left food in the dressers, the closets. I mean, literally, we
Smashed
had
stuff, yeah.
maggots, smashed stuff, pulled the cabinets off the walls, smashed the tile, like completely trashed it. But everything else we've since turned over to property management because, again, that 8 to 10% is worth it. And if you start to get to scale, you can bring that down to 6%, 7% if you start giving one property management company, more volume.
Yep. And I would say too,
Again,
like,
not trying to scare you guys out of buying rental properties. We're just being real. We're just being real. Like there's,
yeah.
and we'll share some success stories too. Like it's not all bad.
No, it's a win. It's
But-
definitely a win in the long run for sure. But then, like on this point too, like what rate of appreciation do you expect from real estate? Right, in Northern Virginia, since World War II, we have averaged about 4%. Right, like that's just a fact. And even with the downturn, we have it's been a 4% trend line, which is very solid, especially given our price point. Now, the one thing that's kind of been eye-opening to us is, how do you actually look at those numbers and then decide like, all right, what are we doing here? So, for example, we have a rental that we bought right near George Mason University in downtown Fairfax, right? Single-family home, 5 bedrooms, we rent it out. We've slowly laddered the rent up a little bit, but they've been good tenants. We tried to rent it out to college students, like per room, but we missed the mark where by the time the house was finished, school had already started, people already had their places, so it was a family. But we bought that in 19. Now it's, we were just looking at the numbers, so instead of just looking at the rate of appreciation, we should be looking at what is the rate of return on equity. Right? So it's worth $750. We owe $350. We have $400,000 sitting there. Basically, what are we making on that, right? The rent is $3,250. Our mortgage is like $2,000. So we're cash flowing $1,250 a month. At the end of the day, when you add up what your net cash flow is and to divide that by your equity,
About 4%.
we're like 3.75%. Which is not a great rate of return, right? Now that doesn't include continued appreciation and
Depreciation.
and tax benefits, but 3.75%. So we're like, all right, we need to tap into that money, take it, roll that into somewhere else where we're getting a higher rate of return. Because if not, like that's just barely keeping up with inflation.
Right. Yeah. And so what our mentors have showed us is that yes, equity is great, but what are you doing with that equity, right? And so if you have 400 grand equity here and 300, and that's the power of compounded interest of owning. And that house we bought as a foreclosure, we put about an $80,000 renovation into it and kind of doubled our equity at that point. It's kind of like the one we were talking about in Del Rey. But our mindset has been you buy real estate, you pay it off, you live off the reap the rewards later. People that actually scale rental portfolios say, yeah, that's great, but it's going to take you 200 years to do that. So how about you tap into the equity and keep
How long you plan on
compounding?
living?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Your grandkids are going to enjoy that equity.
Yeah.
And so there's two different trains of thought. There's also nothing wrong in this area with buying 5 properties, 10 properties, catching $3,000 a month, which is very easy to do, and you pay those off, and there's $15,000, $30,000. That's a great life. And so we have clients that have deployed that strategy and are living large right now. And there's other people that say, I'm feeling about 10, I want 100. How do I do that, right? So there's no right or wrong. The guys that we were out hanging out with are the ones that scale to 1,000. The only way to do that is to tap into equity, consistently cash out. So what we learned through that trip and those different number crunching is that in order to cash out in a high interest rate environment, even if you have 60% equity, you've got to keep bumping rents. Because in this environment, they're looking at DSCRs, right? Debt service coverage ratios. They're not looking at how much equity you have because underwriters are nationwide. They don't know our market. They're going to assume that our market's going to decline next year. So you're like, do your rents cover the debt service plus? And if you're a good landlord and you're like, well, we'll let it ride. You've been good tenants. When the rates rise, that doesn't cover. So we can refi, but we can only pull out like $100K.
Yep.
Whereas by bumping rents $300 a month, which we're going to do this year, we can pull out extra money. So it's just kind of working the numbers.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, basically, is what you just said, is are you gonna take the money out, or are you gonna try and figure out a different way to, because refinancing is expensive right now.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably bumping your rate up significantly, depending on the property.
Yep.
So is it worth it? That's kind of the question.
So I think refinancing completely, probably not. One strategy is we sell it and we 1031 it, right? And so we take that 350K equity, roll into something bigger. That way you're still trading up your rate, but you're also getting the tax benefit. That particular house we cost segged 3 years ago. So we've got 2 years left of really catching the depreciation. So we're probably not going to sell it for the next 2 years, but if we don't do one of those two, we'll probably sell it the next 2 years. Or what we could also do is say, which we thought about doing, hey, you've been a great tenant, but if you don't want to raise rents, we'll buy you out of your lease. We'll give you a month's rent and we'll move you. But that would have happened in like 2 weeks ago. And then we could have gotten 5 college students in there, bump rents from $3,250 to $4,300. Now all of a sudden our debt service ratio just looks a lot different. So anyways, let's talk around that. Let's talk about return on equity. Let's talk about cash flow. What questions do you guys have?
Well, I was was kind of curious, if you're buying a property for a longer hold, like a longer play that you're talking about, what kind of debt are you putting on the property? Like, you know, if hard money's kind of out the window, you need something longer term.
30-year debt as much as we can,
Yeah.
especially on anything under 4 units. Good.
Yeah, and I'd say we're putting down about 20 to 25%.
Yeah.
Is, you know, I don't want to be super levered, but at the same time, like, that's the benefit of using other people's money, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be putting 50% down just so I'm cash flowing a little more money when that other 25% could go buy me another appreciating asset.
Right.
Another option that we have done recently is Lending Deck does 30-year LLC loans. It's a private money lender that we've known for 12 years, used to be here with Grid with us. They have 30-year LLC loans fixed. We actually got a couple deals through at like 3.5%, 3.75%, 30-year on multifamily in 2020, 2021. Now those rates are looking like 8, basically 7.25 plus a point.
So you're not personally guaranteeing this, you're like all.
You are.
Oh, we are.
You're personally guaranteeing that as well. And now we're not doing those loans or buying them down, because if we do that, we'll just have a plan of refinancing the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So now that stuff we're buying moving forward, we're using them.
It's not like a Fannie Freddie product, right?
No, it's a
No,
private
their own
lenders.
portfolio.
Yeah. Another thing that, again, talking to mentors, and we thought this would be a big part of our market last year. We didn't see it as much, but seller financing. We've never seen a time, like we talked about earlier, where rates doubled in a year. So if you're selling your townhouse in Arlington, you're sitting at a 3% rate, and I'm going to buy it at an 8% rate, I can afford to pay you probably 50 to 100 grand more by you holding that note. And so, again, these other guys we know that have 200 units in the last 3 years, their whole pitch is seller financing. So yeah, you could sell it and cash out your 400 grand to send your daughter to college on Pershing, right? But once that money's gone, what's your plan for it, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to send to college where college education goes away. Or if you sell it and you're elderly and you might have a 5 or 10 year runway left because you've owned these assets for a long time. Now your kids are inheriting 500 grand, $1 million bucks. How are they going to invest that money? What if we do this? What if we pay you, you hold a note, and instead of me buying that for $1 million bucks at today's rates, I'll give you 1.1, but instead of me paying the bank 8%, I'll pay you 5. And what that is it's residual income for you. And then if you transition 10 years from now, your family's now getting a residual income for the next 30 years, and they can't blow through that cash.
And they'll hold the note until
They'll hold the
it's,
note.
paid, I guess?
They'll do typically a 30-year amortization table, and they'll do like a 10 or 15-year note with a goal of refinancing out. But I've never, I'm 40 and my son's 6, so I've never really thought about that. They're like, when you get to these landlords that own 20, 30, 50, 100 doors, 200 doors, their biggest concern is no longer cash flow because they have no debt. Their concern is estate planning. And they're concerned that I've worked my whole life accumulating 100 doors and now I'm worth 20 million bucks and I'm going to give it to my knucklehead kids that don't know how to manage the money.
Yeah.
So it's almost a handcuff for the kids and grandkids, and they're like, it's a win-win. But we're looking at it from the other side of the lens, like we're building assets, not necessarily unloading them. They're like, that was the biggest aha for us as we're having these conversations and negotiations. So that's what we're starting to offer more. Anytime we're making an offer on a rental, is your client open to holding a note? There's one on Commonwealth right now that we're looking at. We could build an ADU. They want 1.4. We can only pay like 1.1 to 1.2 for it at current rates. But we'll give you 1.3 if they'll hold a note for the next 10 years. And then you're just betting that rates will come down the next 10 years.
Yep.
And you're basically, shooting the gap between the bank financing and the seller's note.
But then they're getting their number in today's value, right? So they're then taking that and they're like, okay, I'm still getting this residual here. So they're still, in a way, keeping a rental,
Yeah.
right? And we're bringing that delta from whatever they're willing to finance.
And that might be 10% down, could be 20% down. You're controlling the asset, and then you're setting the terms on the note. What we've also looked for all year is VA assumable loans. But typically what we're finding right now on potential rental properties is that they've owned it for too long, so their equity is too high. So you're putting 300 to 500 grand cash into it to assume that 2.5% rate, which you can do.
Well, we were looking at one today, like down in Seminary Valley in Alexandria, and they're on the market at $750, and they're advertising, hey, it's a 2.5% assumable VA loan, and it's a $350 note. So $750 is still a little steep for the property, but somebody that has the $400,000 to put down can then have that note at the 2.5%, and they got a great equity position. Now, if you can still negotiate the price and assume the note, even better, right? Like, that's just where it's like, but me as a landlord, I don't want to put 400 grand down on a $750,000 asset, you know? So that's where it's like, all right, where can we kind of, let's make a deal type of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I think one of the biggest things too is we do a lot of flips and builds, right? And we also have the rental portfolio, but there's a big difference in terms of the scope of work that you do. Now, to Corey's point, the one that we're thinking of holding down in Del Rey on Howell Street, right? We were planning to just flip it, make some quick money and keep rolling that. But we are, instead of, doing maybe the whole $150,000 renovation, we could get away with probably putting 70 into it, cleaning it up, maybe not opening some walls here or there. But we've decided to kind of hit that middle ground and still do that $120,000 renovation. So more than we would put into a typical rental, right? Just to maximize the actual building itself. So if we decide to sell it in 2 years, once the market turns and rates drop, then we can go ahead and kind of maximize the outsell of it as opposed to doing the work twice. We typically don't do that if we're buying something that we know we're going to hold for a very long time, right? We would put in LVP, cheap faucets, cheap this, cheap that, cheap appliances, right? Decent counters that look good, but low grade stuff,
Yeah, we're turning one in Clarendon right now, which is next to your listing. It's a 5-bed, 2-bath apartment, and we're doing like an $18,000 renovation throughout it. And so it's LVP, refinishing the floors, Santa Cecilia gold granite, an affordable stainless steel package, cheap light fixtures, glazing the tub, new doors, turning and burning 2 weeks in and out. Because also, if you have an asset that your goal is to rent it, the longer you're out of service, the more. So like that rent's $4,400 a month. So if I do a 2-month renovation on that, and by the way, if I'm pulling permits now, it's a 3-month renovation, that also lost $15,000 in rents while you're renovating it. So we're doing a 2-week turn where we're only losing $2,200 in potential rent. And by doing this renovation, we should take it from like $3,850 to hopefully $4,300 to $4,400 a month. And so the break even on that, we also look at what's our break even. So if we're making $400 more a month, that's $4,800 a year. It's about a 3-year break even. Now, if we did a $50,000 renovation, our break even is going to be a lot longer runway on that. The only reason most investors do that is if you're looking to bump rents and sell in the next 2 years to sell at a bigger cap rate, basically. But yeah, most of our renovations on this side are going to be quick in and out.
Yep. And then from like a property management standpoint, you said you manage your own, right?
Yeah.
So you're running all the background checks, the credit checks, all that type of stuff, collections, right? So, I mean, for our property managers, when you start giving them properties in bulk, I mean, standard is 8 to 10%, but if you start giving them more than just standard, you're kind of...
Yeah, we're closer to 7.
Yeah.
And that we have one client that's now in like the high 6s on his, but they are now managing, some property manager friend of ours is now managing like 25, 30 units for this one landlord, and they're in a couple buildings. So also if you have, that's what we've realized over time is like, we're residential guys, right? So it's like we'll go buy 20 townhouses and we're going to scale that. But what we've realized is if you have 20 doors under one roof, economies of scale. You got one roof, you've got one boiler, your property management fees are driving down because they're all managing that one location versus trying to buy a portfolio that might be spread out over 3 miles. So you could get property management fees down on multifamily to the 5 to 6 range if you're a good operator and you've got volume. But I would budget 7.5 to 8.5 here locally, really 8 to 8.5.
Yep. And then like, what do you expect from the property manager, right? Like they're kind of giving you your monthly P&L.
More than we get.
More than we get. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a good property manager honestly should handle 90% of the, so they should, so again, if you want, it depends, you want them to lease it. So a lot of times we'll lease it in-house. And then, because if you're going to have your property manager lease it, it's 1 month's rent. So that's $3,000, right? And then you hope that that tenant doesn't move out in a year, because if it does, that's actually $250 a month. You paid that leasing, fee. But essentially, they can lease it or not, and then from there, they're writing the lease for you. They should be doing a thorough pre-move-in walkthrough, documenting photos and a checklist for any damage, and then they're catching any calls, they're collecting rents, they're scheduling any service calls. And what we've done, I'm frugal, so like what we've done is bumped it over the time where we used to have a $250 threshold, now a $500, now we're going that to $1,000. But I have a property in Waldorf that we bought this year. We bought it for $207. We put $20K into it. It's worth $275, so we created $50K of equity. We're renting that for $2,000 a month. we're trying a new property manager because before we recommend our clients a property manager, we normally like to try them out ourselves. They're doing it great. It took forever to fill the tenant. We had 9 applicants, none qualified except for this one. So then they are very hands-on and they're handling all the service requests, which is great. So I'm not getting that call, my faucet's dripping, my dishwasher's broken. But what I've realized when they do send their guys out, they're twice the cost of ours. So we got a quote to paint the hall bath from them at $800. And I was like, I kind of want to set that threshold from 500 to 1,000 so I don't have to worry about it. But I know that my painter can do that for $350 to $400. So then I jump back in, schedule my painter, save $400, got him out there 2 days later. So a good property manager should manage your repairs, your maintenance, collect your rents. If there's any issues, lead the way on evictions and hopefully make that more efficient than ours did. And then also come up with a detailed report of a move out, and then also what needs to be done to get it rent ready. And then I think a good property manager should also tell you what it should rent for and the vacancy rate expected or days on market. We normally run those ourselves, but if you're not a full-time realtor, you're going to need to rely on them to do that for you too.
I mean, and you're self-managing yours, so like what does your day-to-day look like with that? Or has it been fairly chill or?
Pretty chill, but when it heats up, it's never convenient, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you got to really get into it, like relearn everything, figure out where things are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for the most part around here, everybody's sticking around and paying on time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with your Airbnb, what do you have a obviously property manager over there, or you?
I have a cleaning team that does all the cleaning, and they do like small maintenance stuff.
Okay.
But I do other stuff. That was actually somebody calling from my Airbnb right now.
Okay.
I had to like step out and help them get in the door because the door is locked. I don't know why the door is locked.
And what would that be if you didn't take that call? What would you have to pay somebody for like the Airbnb property management? Because I know that's even an accelerated number over.
Yeah, around that area, what I've gotten quotes of is like 20 to 22% for like full service.
Revenue.
That's not cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. So that's why I'm doing it myself. It's just one property right now, so
Right.
I can do that.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to scale, it would
So
be
at $5,000 of rent, $1,000 a month going off the top basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I manage ours, but Saturday night I took my son and our nephew to Ninja Turtles, and so her phone starts blowing up, and she's like, I need your help. I'm like, we're in the middle of a movie. What's going on? She's like, I can't answer this question because she handles 90% of it. Eight women were there renting it, getting ready for a wedding, and they blew a fuse because they're all using hair dryers at the same time. And they're freaking out. We can't get ready for the wedding. We need an electrician here. I'm like, it's 7:30 on a Saturday. Like, are you here? I'm like, no, I'm 2 hours away at Ninja Turtles. I'm going to talk you through this. We're able to they tripped a breaker and a GFCI, but that's the kind of stuff that you get those calls sometimes.
Right, yeah. happens.
But yeah, property, it's anywhere from, I'd say 12 to 22% for short term,
Yep.
depending on the service.
And you were saying 6 to 8% for long term?
Long term is, so you get into submarkets, and really for our area, 8% is about the average.
8%.
8 to 9%. You'll find some at 10, you'll find some at 7. As you get into other markets, like the Hampton Roads market, the standard is 10, but the average rent might be $1,300, whereas our average rent's like $2,900. And so it's kind of a numbers game a little bit. Well, you got any rental properties, dude?
Yeah, we got a few of them. We're
How-
doing a little bit of management and self-management as well, trying to feel out.
Because you guys are doing the short term in Chesapeake Beach, right?
Yeah, yeah. We hired we use a vault,
Okay.
and they do all the booking stuff
Yeah.
and promote out their Airbnb, and then right now we're handling the ground stuff.
Maintenance
ourselves.
stuff, yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
How's it going so far?
So, I mean, just as you'd expect, we had a disaster. The very first tenant walked into a flood in the basement. I was too cheap and had that handyman take the washer and dryer over and set it up. Didn't set up the drain right, so it backed up on the cleaning lady right before the guy showed up. So it was good, but they were cool with it. It worked out. We got 5-star reviews on the first 3 guests, so it was good.
Nice.
Definitely learning experience that the cleaning people want too much money. Like over time, that's not going to scale.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out how we do it locally and how we manage it locally,
Yep.
remotely. It's like I said, I ended up doing going over Sunday with my son and ended up going to the laundromat and did 16 loads of laundry commercially to try to get it ready.
Right.
Because our cleaning crew didn't show up. So
Ah.
yeah, just trying to figure out how much of that do you want to deal with.
Yeah. You're only as good as your cleaning and your maintenance people afar. Ours is 2 hours away. I was looking, our best year, I think was 2020. I think our rents were like 45 grand, and our cleaning fees went up to like 7,500 that year. And I was like, dude, that's too big of a percentage. And what I realized is that we were doing short, like weekend rentals, and we probably weren't charging enough. So we were getting clean sometimes twice a week, and so we tweaked the metrics a little bit. And then she kept bumping up her cleaning fees, and they did a great job. But I'm like, and then we were getting pushback, and she's like, well, I'm not going to reduce my fees. I'm like, well, if we add the fees in, we're going to get less rentals. So do you want more volume or a higher hourly rate? You know, so we kind of worked it out. But cleaning's a big part of it. But yeah, it's not fun going over there doing 16 loads of laundry. But you got to have a backup. You got to have a backup crew.
But I do think, like, again, it's about like being purposeful, right? Like, there's a lady who's not here. She's in our office. She usually comes to these meetups. Her name's Amy. She had a rental property near, or it used to be her primary, right?
Yeah.
Like in the Sleepy Hollow, Lake Barcroft area of Falls Church. She has spent the last like 18 months really dialing in what that looks like. And she's not doing the long-term rental. She's doing the short-term rentals, right? Airbnbs. Last year, she netted over 6 figures because she really had it dialed in from a technology standpoint. She got her cleaners. She manages it herself, so she's not paying the 20% or whatever. But to net 100 grand on a rental that
Yeah.
used to be your primary, that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I think she was fortunate. They bought a while ago. They refied it at a
rates.
low rate. They've got a lot of equity in it, so their mortgage is not a lot. But also, that's great. That's great cash flow.
oh yeah.
And again, if you're doing it at a high level, what we've learned is that people are going in there tweaking their rates every day. What else? We're not talking about any more of these. We'll talk about some wins before we wrap up, by the way, okay? You guys are like, dude, I'm never buying a rental property. Yeah. Thank you for scaring the shit out of me.
Do you guys ever invest in like places that you want to like vacation?
Yeah. So that Airbnb we bought as our second home, and we use it 12 to 14 weekends a year, and we still cash flow on it. We are looking at Outer Banks right now.
Yep.
We've looked at Lake Anna, Smith Mountain Lake. We bought another place on the river in the Eastern Shore that will probably could rent for $1,200 a night, and it's an hour away. So you're talking our accountant and what Aaron said too.
What? That you can write it off?
Yeah. So one of our accountants guys actually has 15 Airbnbs from Hawaii to Florida, and basically his strategy is I'm going to buy only in places that I want a vacation. He still runs the metrics. And then every time he travels, you write it off. So the beautiful thing of having them out of the area is you go to California, you can write that trip off. If I go to Airbnb, I'm changing light bulbs, I'm changing sheets, whatever it is, you can write that trip off.
Half a day, 4 hours a day.
No, not even, because you can count travel time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
as long as you're doing something there physically to improve or tweak the property.
But like to that point, like my wife and I have been looking about buying something with my sister-in-law and her husband. They live down in Raleigh, right? We've been looking at Smith Mountain Lake or the Outer Banks, and we went and previewed like, I don't know, a couple houses down in Corolla, right? Like 1.8 to 2 million. But in today's rates, right? Like, let's just say you're putting down 25%, you're putting down 500 grand on a $2 million place, financing the 1.5. Those were bringing in about 300 in rents. But after 20% property management, after debt servicing, it's not that sexy. Now, granted, I'm not saying, like you can find stuff, but like it does, the rate game has kind of changed the whole calculus of it all for
Right.
sure.
At 4%, those numbers made sense all day. At
All day
8%,
long.
it's harder to find that cash flow still. And be careful if you are looking at those places, because we were listening to a podcast last week. It's just shy of 1% of the total housing stock in the country is now considered short-term rentals, between VRBO, Evolve, Airbnb. And I think that includes short-term furnished housing as well, or for corporate housing. But what happened is the rates were inflated. So we were looking at stuff in the Outer Banks 3 and 4 years ago. The cash flow is like $5-6 grand a month. There's no brainers. And I actually was looking at a place on the ocean for 1.1, a lot of deferred maintenance. But ultimately, I was like, wait a second, these numbers are almost too good to be true. However, people haven't been traveling abroad for the last 12 months. So what happened is a lot of people bought vacation rentals with increased rents, including a couple agents in our office. And the performers looked really good. But once people start traveling to Europe and Hawaii and flying all over the world again, then all of a sudden those rents started to drop a little bit. And so the numbers aren't the same. So I would be careful right now, because I feel like we're right at that point where rents are probably starting to slow down a little bit, but rates went up. So there are deals out there, just be careful. But this analyst was expecting that we're going to see a sell-off of 20% of the Airbnb market over the next 2 years because the metrics aren't working right now. But what happened is that those markets got saturated over the last 5 years, and then rates went up with it. So we'll see how it plays out. But we need that inventory, so hopefully they do sell. But
Yeah, I was gonna ask, you were mentioning earlier, like flips. Do you find many flips around here? I feel like that's like, really hard to find in general, but.
We have
I don't know.
7 projects flips right now and about 20 in the pipeline with us and investors.
That's within like this area.
All
hour
Northern
of
Virginia.
Northern
Yeah,
Virginia?
20-mile radius, yeah.
Now, I will say though, like to that point, like half of those we're finding on the market, half of those we're finding off the market. So we're still buying a lot on the MLS. We're just hammering people if they've been on the market for 10 plus days, right? But at the same time, we're also kind of ramping up the scope of work that we're doing on some of those. So, you know, for instance, we just did a project in Falls Church City, and we bought the neighbor's house, right? Bought it for $640 off the market. It's a standard colonial. We're doubling the size. We're digging out the basement and doing an addition, 3-level addition, and basically doubling the size of it to where it's kind of like a new home. And we're targeting an outsell of 1.6 to 1.7, but we're putting 5 to 6 in it. So we're doing like larger scale projects, and our goal is to kind of like walk that fine line of like 50 to 60% are the quick hitters with inside the box and just make them short and sweet and just knock them out. And then the other 40% is going to be the larger scale, longer term projects that hopefully we can deliver this time next year or later, you know, sometime between Q2, Q3, and Q4 next year. And when rates come down and they're not at 7.5, maybe they're at 6.5, and then that's just going to spur more buyer activity. So that's kind of the
Talking with AJ about that yesterday after you left. They're working on a project right now that we helped them source in Manassas. They bought it for $275, going to put 100 to 120 in, hopefully sell for very high 4s. So those deals are out there. You just have to know where to look and move quick when they hit. But we're selling one next week in Kings Park West in Fairfax, 2,400 square foot colonial. We bought it for $675. We're putting about 135 into it, and we're pending at $1,015,000 right now. And that was about a 6 to 7 month job. Pretty big job. Some structural issues in the basement. Has a little history to the house. And that particular house was off market. There was a murder-suicide at that house, and so they didn't want to go to market. A lot of emotional, obviously, baggage there with the home. And so that one, we weren't sure how that past would impact the value, but that's a house that needed to sell off market because they were never going to get to market. Like Sean said, we wrote 3 offers today. So we're writing 10 to 15 offers a week and casting a really wide net, pounding the pavements. The deals are there, but they weren't there like they were 5 years ago because inventory is so tight.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. It's
and-
probably much more.
Yeah, and we're also betting on the longer term projects, which Andrew and I talked about yesterday, is instead of fighting rates, are they going to be 7.25 or 7.75? You know, what's the Fed going to do? Let's just look 12 to 18 months out, deliver longer term projects where we feel very confident rates will be back in the low 6s and hit the market at that time. And then it's just how do we control our costs and our timing in the meantime. Mm-hmm. But there are deals there.
And we were just looking at 2 more that we were going to write on today, and it's like we could force the numbers and hope that the market bails us out, or it's like, let somebody else have it type of thing. And I think that's one of the biggest things when it comes to the flipping side is like the numbers don't lie. We can project that the market's going to be up 5% next year.
And it should be.
It should be, but we're kind of underwriting deals flat, as in what will it sell in today's dollar, and that's kind of what we're projecting it would outsell in 6 to 9 months from now, hoping that it outperforms that. But
in the second half of last year, we were underwriting deals as expecting them to depreciate 5 to 7%.
well, and I guess like to
And
that
we were
though,
just padding that into our numbers because the uncertainty was so high, rates hit so high, stock market plummeted, inventory went from 2 weeks to 2 months in a matter of a month, right? And then all of a sudden sellers are just freaking out. What do I do? We're a solution, but we're not a solution at your number. We're 150 grand below. No pressure, take it or leave it. And we were shocked on what percentage that we were actually getting. Like we were expecting a counter and people were just signing off on it. Looking back on it, we wish we would have bought a lot more last year.
well, I mean, and that was
then-
the thing. I mean, obviously this isn't about flipping, but we can go down that kind of rabbit hole. Like last year, we've personally bought and flipped 350 houses since 2007 now at this point. Last year was the first year that we lost money on deals, and there was 2 deals that we bought last spring when rates were 3.5, 4.
He bought them.
Yeah, okay. He runs construction. We went over budget. But we bought them at 3.5% rates, right? And then rates doubled and they didn't move. One of them we lost $8,000 on a townhouse down in Delray, and one we lost $92,000 on a house down near Mount Vernon. Now, thank God we bought like 6 houses during the fall that then we delivered this spring, and those performed better than any of the 300 we've ever done. So the one thing that kind of showed us was like always be a buyer and all,
You just have to adapt with the market.
exactly, and just kind of know what your pro forma is, and hey, you know what? Sometimes you got to cut losses. Like that was not an easy pill to swallow, especially when the market was what it was, and the real estate team's not selling. We're losing money every month, and it was just like, when is this going to stop? And then it was just like, boom, in January, February, March, and April, it just kind of recouped.
Yeah, as soon as rates hit 6% again, you remember this, the realtors in the room, rates hit 6 the market kind of unleashed again. And we were beating ourselves up, like, what did we do wrong? What did we miss here? What was our blind spots? How do we learn from that, right? Because 6-figure loss is no joke. And at the end of the day, what it really boiled down to is we went a little bigger than we needed to on the project because the comps were setting $950 a million. So we were pushing the price on the finishes. And then at the end of the day, we bought these houses when rates were 4 and 4.5, and we sold them when rates were 7.5. Like, we can't control the economy. You don't know what's going to happen in 6 to 9 months. But what you have to do is just adjust, adapt, learn from those mistakes, and then underwrite them differently moving forward. And so we almost stopped buying because I don't want to lose another $100,000 this year. It's not fun. And then we just really adapted our underwriting of those, and then just get more conservative essentially.
Yep.
So we also budgeted at that time was instead of selling in 30 days, we're going to expect them to sit on the market for 3 to 4 months. And we explained that to the seller.
We just kind of padded the numbers across the board. If it was construction was 100, we were going to say it's 120, right? 20% margin. If we thought it would sell for 9, we were underwriting it at 850.
Right.
So we just kind of like hedged our bets in every little aspect. But yeah, well, it's 6:30. I think that
Let's share one win or two of rentals because I feel like we just smashed the whole rental strategy today. So give us a win. You're going to give us a win. I'll give a win. Everybody. At least one win on the rental properties because I feel like we just talked everybody out of long-term holds. Hey.
Yeah. I don't know, I recently had a tenant, I think they left, that they had been there for like 7 years, so it's not uncommon to get some long-term tenants.
And what was that monthly rent?
It started at like 21, and then they left, it was like 23. I
Right.
think.
So that's
it's
25.
basically $25,000 a year
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's $175,000 in rent.
Yeah, same person,
Yeah.
Or says it was a couple and another single person
Yeah.
living on a 2-bedroom.
Nice. So I bought a house in Annandale for $310. I'm in it for like 60, so my basis is like $370. I've had a tenant there now for going on 8 years at $2,600 a month.
Yeah.
So they're approaching $200,000 of rent paid, and now it's worth like $625, and I owe $160 on it. So that is the power of buying and holding long term. And so sometimes you look at, do I sell in 3 years, or do I just hold it for 10 or 15? And what we've seen over the last 100 years tracking the market is 10 years cures every blip. So if you can hold it 10 years, you're going to see your highs and lows, but you're always going to get back to a positive spot. And so I just wish I would have done 20 of those instead of buying 10 in Hampton Roads, right?
But I think to that point, it's like it's not a matter of like timing the market; it's time in the market, right? So like that's really what it is,
Right. And that's like a $1,200 a month cash flow positive on self-management too. So there are a lot of wins. So I just want to share a couple wins before we wrap up. Well, give me a win on one of the Airbnbs or rental.
Yeah, I'd say, the Airbnb, our first month, I think we're gonna clear probably 4,000. So in terms of
Cash flow or gross rents?
Just gross rents.
Okay, cool.
Just gross
Let's do it.
rents, and I think, we're gonna approach that refinance or cash out.
Yep.
And then I love the 1031 idea, or some way to pivot that into a better ROI.
Yep.
And let somebody else hang on to it. I think that, so I'll stop there. I think that's
Nice, that's a
just
win.
Trying
Yeah.
to figure that out. And
Totally.
Figure out what the calculations look like.
Yep.
Did you get enough? You phone your house for like a good amount of time.
I think my win would be just the equity that we have. Like in 4 years, about 200 grand in equity. We did some remodeling
Yeah.
at the beginning, so that helped. But just that, I'm happy with that.
That's 50 grand a year.
That's
It's $4 grand a month.
all day long.
And that beats cash flow 10 times out of 10. And going back to appreciation versus cash flow, there's no right or wrong, but that's a huge win.
Yeah.
Nice. And I'll take that call. I'll step out and take the call
Right,
for a
yeah.
deadbolt if I have
5
to.
minutes for that.
Or I'll tell you what, just give me that $4 grand. I'll take the calls this month.
Not a bad hourly rate.
Yeah, that's huge.
I
you
would
wanna
say
share?
my biggest win would be the 7 properties that we bought down in Virginia Beach. They doubled over the time that we bought them, and that's what I'm paying my ex-wife off with. So it's, I'm not necessarily reaping the benefits, but it paid the bills.
In addition to that, we do have 6 figures in a 1031 company that we're moving up here. So those places were an absolute pain in the ass and a headache over the time, but they did double in value. They were still good assets. They were just frustrating assets. So by doing that, we're taking that cash, moving that up here with the goal of buy 4 to 8 units here with that appreciation. So it's still a win, it's just
Oh, yeah.
a stressful win.
Yep.
Cool. All right, guys, we can wrap up there.
Yeah, well, we appreciate everybody coming. Obviously, gonna spend a couple of minutes